Mic check. Let me get this back in close. Bring it up a little bit. All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the penultimate week, week 15 of the semester. We are near the end. So, one more week of instruction and then finals. So, I'll pull up our schedule here right quick. You can see that we're going through chapters. We're going through chapters 12, chapters 13, and chapters 14. So this is us right here, week 15. And the anatomy of the nervous system, where we'll go over particularly the parts of the brain, parts of the spinal cord, and then the somatic nervous system, looking at the pathways, right? The pathways sensory going up to from the periphery to the brain, and the motor going from the brain or from the central nervous system out towards the periphery. So the anatomy of the nervous system is where we're at this week, and then there's only a few more labs, so we're finishing up our lab assignments as well, and I've got much of my handful grading all of those. So just again as another note, you'll see that your final will be completed on finals week. Not only will it be completed on finals week, but it will be a sectional final, right? So it'll go over chapters 12, chapters 13, and chapters 14 primarily. And won't have too much related to muscular system or skeletal system, so primarily focus on the nervous system. So again, as we've kind of been talking here, the chapter 12 reviews the nervous tissue, anatomy of the nervous system, and is in chapter 13, and the somatic nervous system, chapter 14. Just getting a writing utensil here. All right, here we are. Welcome to the second to last, the penultimate semester here. Again, as we've mentioned, this section of the semester, chapters 12, 13, and 14 are being reviewed here. So the nervous system, the anatomy of the nervous system, the somatic nervous system are all the topics that we'll be covering here. The chapter 12 that we kind of reviewed here last week included some of the divisions of the nervous system, including the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The functions of the nervous system, so you can see and quickly identify here the major functions of the nervous system. They include the sensory or the afferent component, the integration component, often referred to as the association area. This is primarily occurs at the central nervous system. And then finally, the efferent or the motor component here, that is the signal that's sent from the central nervous system out to the peripheral nervous system. We also talked about neurons and neuroglia, so the parts of a neuron, specifically the soma, dendrites, and the axon, and which part is, again, responsible for the sensory component. So again, we'll go backwards. The motor component's the axon. The integration occurs at the cell body or the soma. And then ultimately that sensory information comes in from the dendrites. The structural and functional classification of neurons, whether they are sensory, as we mentioned here, sensory integration or motor, or structurally they could be unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar. And then all of the structures related to the synapse, right, where two neurons meet. Finally, we talked about the concept of an action potential and resting membrane, reviewing the steps of an action potential and the situation that occurs for an action potential to be able to occur. as well as some of the most common neurotransmitters. And so the major neurotransmitters that we should be familiar with as it relates to the nervous system, and in this chapter are going to be see if I can't type them up for you. They're going to be the first one is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a very common one. And remember, that's one that stimulates causes a muscle contraction to occur, so it's excitatory. Glutamate, GABA, and glycine are going to be the most common neurotransmitters that you should be able to identify and know whether they are excitatory or inhibitory, right? Are they likely to cause an action potential or likely to decrease the likelihood of an action potential? So there it is, the sections of chapter 12, and then chapter 13 is a big one here. We're really going to focus this on more of the anatomical structures. So here we're going to be talking about really the parts of the brain, the parts of the spinal cord. And as you can see here, it's kind of delineated as to, fix this a little bit. It's delineated as to the not only the structural part, but also the functional component as well. So you may be asking, what does that mean, the structural versus the functional? And so let's kind of, we'll talk about that here. I'll open up a slide perhaps. Might be helpful. I'm going to try this picture. Let's see if this picture has what I need. A little bit. One more here. I'm going to find one picture. Maybe let's start with the, I'm just going to go to my slides. So when we talk about the brain, we'll see that, let me start with this slide right here. We'll find our primary feature here. The major landmark that you want to identify is related to the brain, and the surface of the brain is going to be this structure called the central sulcus. So you can see the central sulcus here. Follow the central sulcus down, and anterior to the central sulcus, there's the region here. We could call that M, and then S. Why? Because there's the motor region and the sensory region. So functionally, this is the primary motor cortex, and functionally you have the primary somatosensory cortex. So the area related to movement and the area related to all the sensory that you see, right? That would be the functional area. But it also has an anatomical name. The anatomical name is associated with its where it's located, right? So when I talk about that, what we're talking about is, let's zoom in here. You can see here, again, the primary motor cortex, that's the functional name, or the primary sensory cortex is the functional name, whereas the anatomical name here is the pre-central gyrus or the post-central gyrus. So again, let's go ahead and identify that key landmark here. There's the central sulcus. This is the M region, the motor region, but also referred to as the pre-central gyrus, right? It is anterior to the central gyrus, and then you have to central sulci, excuse me, and then you have the post-central gyrus, right? I'll highlight that with the S, right? So that is located posterior to the central sulcus, and so you've got first here, I'll put a little F here for its functional. The functional name is the primary motor cortex. Its structural or anatomical region is referred to as the precentral gyrus. The same thing here. You can see here that the primary sensory cortex, the functional name, the postcentral gyrus is the anatomical name. Let's do one more here just to kind of reiterate this. So you can see here that the occipital lobe houses the visual cortex, and finally the auditory cortex is located in the temporal lobe. So again, anatomically there's regions. So this is the auditory cortex located in the temporal lobe, right? There it is. And then the visual cortex located in the occipital lobe. So that's the idea behind being related to the functional and structural classification or names of each of these areas of the brain. And then the other component is, let's take a look at that as it relates to, whoa, didn't mean to do that. Oh, that was quick. Look at that. As it relates to the spinal cord, right? So the sectional arrangement of the spinal cord is very similar. If we look at the right side of the screen first, you'll see that there is anatomical structures. So you can see that the gray matter is referred to, let me zoom out there a little bit. You can see that the gray matter is referred to as horns, right? So the gray matter is horns. The white matter are referred to as columns. I'm going to zoom in there really big. So take a look there. You can see that you've got the posterior column. Let me zoom in one more time. So you can see here we've got the posterior column there in the back, right? The posterior column, the lateral column, and the anterior column. So the structural name here, or the anatomical name, is the columns. However, you can see here that in the, well, you'll see that a little bit later, but this here is primarily sensory. In the posterior columns, there's primary sensory. In the lateral columns, it's a little bit mixed sensory and motor. And then in the anterior column, it's motor. The horns here are the gray matter. There's the posterior gray horn, the lateral gray horn, and the anterior gray horn. And then as you can see, I'll move this over to the side here. You'll see that there's the motor nuclei are located in the anterior and lateral gray horns, and the posterior gray horn houses the sensory nuclei. Right, there it is in the front, and then the motor nuclei located in the anterior, excuse me. And then finally, in chapter 14, we review the somatic nervous system. So the somatic nervous system is where we talk about your senses, so the senses of taste, smell, sight, balance, and hearing, as well as a few of those ascending pathways that referred to as the dorsal column system and the lateral spinal thalamic tract. And then the most common, or the descending pathway that we should be familiar with, is called the corticospinal tract. That's the tract that's related to movement. And so I'll pop that up here. Let's see what we have. Let's see. It is. So here we have two of the ascending pathways, those sensory pathways. One's related to fine touch and proprioception. The other side is related to pain and temperature. And you can see they take two different pathways. One goes straight up the spinal cord. The other one crosses or decussates off of the spinal cord. And those are what we refer to as the ascending pathways. The descending pathway is the corticospinal tract, right? That's the one that's related to movement. You can see that it starts at the precentral gyrus, crosses over at the brainstem, and then travels all the way down the spinal cord. So that's what we're referring to when we refer to these ascending and descending tracts. And so there it is, chapters 12, 13, and 14 that have prepared for us and ready for the last test of the semester. There's a few more lab assignments that are to be completed, but I'll be grading them all through the next week here, and hopefully you'll have a good understanding of what grade you need to know to get in the final for your favorite grade. You guys are doing great. You guys, I encourage you to keep working up with this hard work. I'll continue to work hard and support you guys in all aspects of this semester. And so, again, I encourage you guys to keep up the hard work. Thank you. Take care, and I look forward to all of your responses.